Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future of Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Dr. George C. Nield. George has worked as an Air Force officer, an NASA manager, and a senior executive at the FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation. On March 31st of 2021, he flew on board New Shepard as part of Blue Origin's fourth human space flight. Dr. George, welcome to the Future of Space.
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate you having me on today.
How are you today on this beautiful afternoon?
Doing well, thank you.
Good. Now, before we go on into your journey into space and your flight with Blue Origin, could you share with us 3 words that capture the essence of space for you?
Sure. I would say the first word for space for me is breathtaking. That is certainly an appropriate word to describe one's reaction when you see the beauty of the Earth in the context of our universe. A second word might be inspirational. We look back thousands of years, people have been looking up to the sky and seeing the sun and the moon and the stars and the planets, and that has encouraged them to try and learn and understand and explore and discover and have some context for, are we alone, and what's the meaning of life, all those kinds of things. I think that's going to continue going forward. And then the third word would be transformational. We think about all that we have done in or with or from space in the last few decades. It's really made a significant impact on our daily lives in terms of how we communicate, how we navigate, how we get our entertainment, how we grow crops, how we do financial transactions. And again, I see that continuing in the future in ways that we don't even understand at this point.
I mean, for a lot of people, when we talk about space, they think of the future of space, but really it's the future of our human species in space. It's not one at the expense of the other, but it's one for the support and elevating the other. They work hand in hand. Would you agree?
Yes, very much so.
Now, you've been in the industry for 30 years. You've been surrounding yourself with people that believed in that future. What would you say is the human story of going to space?
So that's a great question. Let me step back just a little bit and talk about why countries have space programs in the first place. And I think there are a number of possible rationales that a government could have for being active in space, and they could range from national security to technological leadership, economic competitiveness, perhaps scientific curiosity, and as an inspiration for students and teachers. So that may explain why governments or space agencies have a space program, but in the last few years, we're seeing companies and wealthy individuals have space programs or space activities too. So why do they want to do that? And I guess my response would be sometimes for many of the same reasons that governments are interested in space, but there's a few other reasons as well. Some strongly believe that it's possible to make money in space. And of course, that can be very difficult at times, but we see a lot of examples where that is successful in terms of telecommunications and other ideas that people have had. You look at others, they might just have a passion for space and want to try to accelerate the progress that we're making. And some examples there could include Sir Richard Branson, who aspires to have the first global space lines that perhaps can bring people together a little bit and help us to understand other countries and other cultures and other societies. Jeff Bezos has this grand vision for millions of people living and working in space to benefit Earth. And Elon Musk is trying to do what he can to help humanity become a multi-planetary species. So those are all pretty bold, ambitious visions for the future, but I think they're representative of the kinds of reasons that space has been and can be important to us in the future.
I think some of the questions that can connect with us is really, why does life want to go there? Why do we go off the beaten path to find new discoveries? Why did Sir Edmund Hillary wanting to go up Everest? Why did we try to take up the sky, in the 1900s, or even get on the water? And I think that there's this inherent curiosity to go to the places that are visually there for us, but are unattainable. I remember when I was kayaking around the Kodiak Islands and paddled for a day, and I found myself into this remote island, and I put the kayak away. I set up the camp, and right after I'm finished setting up the tent, this brown bear shows up, through the grass, and up to my left, up of the hills, I see the two, like a pair of deer that are also there. And for this moment, at that moment, I had this realization that the four of us, the bear, myself, and the deer, had consciously or unconsciously left the mainland and had ventured into the unknown or the known, but had traveled to this place where we were not that many. And it made me wonder if mammals in general have this innate curiosity to venture beyond the horizon, if it's something that's innate in us, or if it's just something that is part of life. What would you say about that?
I think there's a lot of truth to that. And not everyone may have that feeling, and different people have different reactions to risk and benefits and exploring and discovering. But that certainly seems to be a part of human nature for many people.
Now, was space always an attraction for you? What was these milestones that during your upbringing as a child and to where you are today that kept you on that, made you go on that path and kept you on that path moving forward?
So I had my first flight in an airplane when I was just a few weeks old. My father had gotten his pilot's license and took my mother and me up for a ride. And so it was just a small two-seater. And story goes that as the controls were being checked out, the control stick hit me on the head and I cried uncontrollably. I can't say that I actually remember that event, but used to enjoy flying from Virginia to Wisconsin every summer to see our grandparents and so forth. And then a little later, we started seeing activities in space. And so I was very intrigued by and interested in the space chimps and the Mercury astronauts, and used to cut out articles from the newspaper and have a scrapbook with all the pictures from Life magazine and all the rest, and was following those activities very closely. Studied math and science in school and enjoyed those. Was trying to figure out if I could be a part of all this. I decided to go to the Air Force Academy to go to school with the thinking that that would be a great place to learn more about aviation and space. It would be a challenge for me, which I enjoy, and also an opportunity to serve our country. So again, that seemed to be a good fit for me. And then following graduation, had a lot of different opportunities, some of which you mentioned, working as a flight test engineer in the Air Force, and then working for NASA on the space shuttle program, then the commercial space office of the FAA. And each of those was a wonderful activity to get to know what was going on in industry and to help contribute, at least in a small way, to us moving forward.
And then that led you to NASA and obviously the Air Force. Did you think ever that the the opportunity of going to space was going to present itself for you?
So I thought about that growing up. I didn't have perfect eyesight, and so that seemed to be an obstacle in terms of being a military test pilot and following the traditional channels there. But then, as a flight test engineer out at Edwards Air Force Base, NASA, in developing the space shuttle, announced that they were going to have different kinds of people become astronauts, mission specialists, who were not necessarily military test pilots, but also engineers and scientists and doctors and so forth. And so I applied to become a NASA astronaut, actually made the finals twice in that process, but did not make the final cut. Later on, ended up working on the shuttle program as an engineer and a manager, and certainly enjoyed that time, got to know a lot of NASA astronauts and the people that were working on the program, and found that very rewarding as well. Going forward, did not appear that there were going to be any opportunities to personally go myself, but then just in the last year, we've seen that really opening up quite a bit. Blue Origin, about a year ago, announced that they were planning to auction off one of the seats on their very first human space flight. And so I raised my hand and filled out some forms and put in a bid for the auction. And of course, right away, the price got out of this world. So I said, well, I tried, but a little while later, they got back in touch with me and worked out a slot, not on the first flight, but on the fourth flight, as it turned out. So really am excited for having had the opportunity to participate personally in this type of activity after having supported human spaceflight for most of my career.
Now, you mentioned transformational. Now, we know that going to space, the training up to now has always been more focused on the technicality of it, the engineering aspect, the physicality of it. But it's becoming more and more obvious that there's also a spiritual preparation that needs to be done, because the experience is so powerful. I mean, I was talking to Sharon and Mark. Sharon was saying it's so emotional, powerful. It's it's so grand and it's so powerful that if you don't have a framework to really process that information, you can be left kind of wondering what to do with that. How do you think moving forward, as we get more and more public going up to space, how important is it going to become to prepare them mentally and spiritually so that they can get the most of that experience?
That's an interesting question. So different companies have different kinds of vehicles with different training programs, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. And at least so far, there's no requirement that in order to fly, then this is what you have to be interested in, and this is what you have to think about, and this is the way you have to prepare. Blue Origin has decided to implement a system that is completely autonomous. And so there's no pilot on board. There's no pilot on the ground. They do have a mission control room with lots of experts, engineers, and technicians that are watching over the data to make sure things are going according to plan. But that's a real difference in terms of how someone has to train or prepare for the flight. It's not steering the vehicle. You're not trying to punch the right buttons and call up the right displays to rendezvous and dock with the space station or things like that. Instead, they basically had a 3 full day training program that was more describing about the rocket and the capsule itself, the displays, how to use the radio, emergency procedures, and then a lot of time just getting in and out of the capsule and your seat with the harness and so forth, both in terms of a 1G environment before launch and after landing, and how do you buckle those harnesses when you're in microgravity. So it was a much different type of training than, for example, NASA astronauts have typically gone through. But as you mentioned, there's an emotional, spiritual, very special aspect to all this that's really hard to convey if you haven't done it. And so that's one of the challenges, I think, is to try to describe what is this experience like, and how can you can look at lots of pictures, and that doesn't necessarily communicate. You can have people tell stories of what did it feel like, and what did you look at, and what did you do, and all that. But it's a very, very moving experience. In trying to describe it, people say, "Well, how was it?" It was awesome, and you can go through descriptions of minute by minute, what did you do and how did it feel and so forth. I encourage future flyers to pay attention to what they're seeing, what they're hearing, what they're feeling. But I don't know about you. For me, sometimes reading a very special book can be a moving experience that can put you in a different place and help you understand things a little better. If you see a particularly good movie or show, sometimes that can be, wow, that was something. I'm different today than before I saw that. Or even if you hear some special songs or special kinds of music or symphonies, that can really be moving to me, or I can get goosebumps or just feel my heart warm. I would say the space flight was all of those combined and then taken up a level. It's just really something special.
I mean, there's definitely something to be said about these transformational moments in life. And I think that in our culture right now, we tend often to dismiss the necessity for the physicality of these experiences, thinking that they can be replicated either in a virtual reality or just by reading about it. But there's a big difference between the theory and the actual experience. And I think that going outside of that comfort zone, when your body suddenly reacts and you didn't anticipate it, is part of that experience. Whether it's going on the ocean, finding yourself in the middle of the ocean during a storm, and really finding the smallness of who you are and what you are. Or this is the same thing as going up in space. We can rationalize we can rationalize the experience. We can talk about it, but the physicality of the experience, the feeling the G's, and then getting up there and understanding that there's something special about it. There's something that you should not be there. I remember experiencing when I witnessed the solar eclipse, the total solar eclipse of 2017, I think, in Oregon. There's a huge difference between the 99% experiencing the solar eclipse on 99% eclipse and the 100% and being in that path of totality, and understanding in that moment why the societies of the past would go and sacrifice whatever they could find, because there is something really wrong about having the sun disappear. Like your mind goes into place that this should not happen. And I can only imagine going up in a rocket for the first time and suddenly seeing the planet, and your brain is trying to process all that, and having obviously the adrenaline because of the G-force. It's something that cannot be replicated just by putting a helmet and VR. So that needs to be experienced by, I think, our world leaders and everybody, so that we can kind of share that experience. I think you will agree on that.
Yes, very much. There's a lot of different aspects of that. In our case, we were loaded into the capsule, say a half hour before the anticipated launch time, and they come around and check your harnesses and make sure you're all ready to go, and thumbs up everyone. And then the person who's assisting from Blue Origin goes out, they close the hatch, They climb down 7 flights of stairs, hop in a car, and drive a mile away so that if something bad happens on the launch pad, they'll be fine. And then they arm the escape system so that if something bad does happen, then the capsule can be blasted away from the booster and come down under a parachute. And so now you're sitting in a nice, reclined, comfortable chair, just the 6 people on the crew, all by yourselves on this fully fueled rocket, getting a few minutes to reflect on life. So yes, that was certainly a special feeling. During the launch portion itself, you're pushed back in your seats. I've heard shuttle astronauts describe the liftoff as being like a kick in the pants. This was not that way. This was a nice, smooth, but very rapid acceleration up to about 3 Gs or so. And then after a minute, you get to the maximum aerodynamic pressure, or max Q. A little more than 2 minutes was the main engine cut off. And then about 10 seconds later, bang, as the capsule separates from the booster. And then it was time to unstrap and float around. And it was fun to do somersaults and enjoy that. But all of us immediately turned to those huge windows. And without a doubt, the high point of the experience was the view. It's just, I mean, I get choked up and goosebumps just talking to you about it. To see the curvature of the Earth, that thin, bright blue line that is the atmosphere that you are above. And there's this black, black, black sky, blacker than anything that you can imagine. And it is just the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. So you can say, well, I've seen pictures of that. I saw a movie. Yeah, it is not the same. It is not the same. You have to experience this, and it's awesome.
Jim Kitchen, who was on the flight with you, describes the black as this eternal black. It's just apparently there's something about that black that is so different. I mean, it's a physical black. It's and I think we all remember William Shatner coming back and just like black, death, and blue and life. And I remember watching him because here is someone who's trained in processing emotions. That's his job. While the vast majority of us, have to connect the dots. He's someone, first of all, who's been primed all his life with what space, the narrative of space, and the overview effect, and being someone who, take the emotion of the moment and just amplifies it and create the moment. And he's coming back, and I will always remember Jeff is right next to him, and he's festive, has already been over there, but he's caring for the group. Is like, look over there, everybody's celebrating, and William is like, dude, hold on, you have no idea. It's these, like, we go back and become that child, and I think that I find these moments, and you were talking, and I was just, I was getting goosebumps of just imagining that moment of looking out the window and feeling the awe of life and of what it is, and how, as a species, we are at that stage now where we're doing this. This is becoming a commercial opportunity that obviously is going to be, becoming more and more available. But the fact that we are there, that like 300 years ago, the plane was not even invented, and now we're flying people to space. I mean, I always get so blown away and full of optimism about the future when I think of, yes, we have challenges, but we are able to achieve the impossible. Do you still get excited when you think of all the capacities of innovating innovations that we do?
Oh, absolutely. But now more than ever, having had that experience, it has caused me to look back and say, okay, here we are. 61 years after Yuri Gagarin became the first human being to leave the planet. And as of today, there have been 623 people in the whole world who have ever been to space. So, 10 a year on average. I feel very fortunate to be one of those number. But we have to get that number up because it's such an awesome experience that can change you, can move you, can open opportunities for you. What can we do to make this something that more and more people can experience?
So how has it changed your life now back? Um, do you find yourself looking at life differently, or did you change some of your priorities, moving forward after the flight? How is different your life post going up as opposed to what it was before?
So that's a question that I get frequently. And remember now, this entire flight was only about 10 minutes long, and yet it seems so full of different experiences and feelings and emotions and all the rest. As I mentioned, I think it does change you, how you feel about things, how you look at things. And again, I am more committed than ever to trying to enable more and more people to have this experience. And so it caused me to think, so why is that number so small? And as I think about it, well, right now it's pretty costly. And so to the extent that we can get that price down, that'll certainly help. There's also a fair amount of risk involved. If you look back take the United States as an example, there have been roughly 400 space flights with people on board since we first started doing that. And out of that list, there have been 4 fatal accidents. One X-15, Space Shuttle Challenger, Space Shuttle Columbia, and an early test flight of Spaceship Two. So that's a fatal accident rate of about 1%, which is terrible. And that's about 10,000 times more risky than the rate for commercial airliners. So again, we need to figure out how to make these operations more safe. And I think we're going to learn a lot by flying a lot, just as we did for aviation. But the third limitation I think we're seeing right now is just a lack of capacity. It's very exciting to me that just since last summer now, we have 3 companies selling tickets to go to space. SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, and there are others that are working on it. And yet we have, if you look at Virgin Galactic's recent report to their investors, they have like 800 people on the waiting list, and I'm sure SpaceX and Blue Origin have similarly lengthy waiting lists to fly. So, I mean, we're going to need more rockets, we're going to need more spacecraft, we're going to need more spaceports all over the world to allow people who think they might want to try this sometime the opportunity without waiting 10 years in line.
And we have other companies like Space Perspective and Worldview are offering a lower price range, still expensive, but lower price range.
Yes.
But the more of these trips, the lower the cost. Ultimately, the technology is going to get better, the risk is going to get lower, and that's in general, that's the arc of every innovation. I mean, whether it was the cell phone or the computer or cars or even credit that, at the bank, credits, people don't know. I mean, it's a really long time ago, but usually just the rich people would have the opportunity to get credit. The people who didn't have the fortune would never be offered the credit. Now credit is offered everywhere. Everybody has a cell phone. Most of the people can take, the plane to a different country. So all these discoveries, these innovation at some point were totally unavailable for the majority of the people, except for the very few. And it's the same. It's going to be the same thing with space, in 10, 20, 30 years. how long do you think that we have until there's a more accessible space experience?
I believe it's going to continue to grow and expand very, very rapidly, really. And again, just look at the progress that's been made since last summer. So I agree with you completely. I think we are going to learn from experience how to design these systems and how to operate them more safely, more reliably, more cost effectively, and we're going to learn by doing, just as happened in aviation. And so although we see some people being very critical of especially the suborbital flights as, oh, those are just joy rides, why are we spending money? These are not tax dollars. It's important to recognize we're not asking for congressional appropriations for these kinds of flights to take place. But by gaining experience, we're going to learn, what do we need to change? Where do we need redundancy? How can we make these better? How can we make it more reliable and less costly and so forth? And by having some revenues coming in during that process, it enables the company to continue to grow and improve these systems such that they will be available for more and more people. And if people don't want to go on the joyrides, that's fine. But we're going to find these systems being used more and more often for serious scientific and technological reasons, national security, all those kinds of things, in addition to the amazing experience that can have just by going up and looking out the window.
The benefits of the science and technology that are going to trickle down to Earth by going to space are just absolutely incredible. And I think it's hard for people to understand what is around the corner, because one of the, like on Earth, there's not that many incentives to, let's say, be really sustainable or to be really efficient, because the resources are really out there. If you trash something, you just go and get something else. When you go to space, that atom of carbon that you bring with you is worth everything. And you cannot just go and open the door and throw your garbage out, because this could be your food. This could be your next piece of metal that you need. So that atom of carbon needs to be recycled, reused over and over again. There's going to be technologies of how to be efficient with the food that we grow, and how new materials are being built, and obviously the satellites that can help us predict the weather, work with the environmental world, the weather, all these assessment. I think I mean, you've worked in that industry for quite some time. You have a grasp of what is coming. How would you try to convince someone that going to space is just going to be just this box of treasure, not this box of treasures, but this new revolution of innovation that's going to benefit Earth?
So let me gently push back and again maybe try to change the focus of the discussion. Maybe at the beginning, again, we had to have a president challenge the nation and have a national space agency whose mission was not easy, but it was hard, and that's why we want to do it, and it's going to cost us less money. And so you go back to Congress every year for appropriations, and you have a government bureaucracy that is trying to work fast and efficiently. And wow, we're at a very different tipping point now, where we're seeing people not relying on the government, not using the latest government designs for space shuttles or space launch systems. They're looking at reusability. They're looking at flying once a week. Remember when the space shuttle was going to fly once a week? I mean, this is really an amazing thing. And so I don't think we necessarily have to convince all the voters that this is what the nation has to use our tax dollars for, but there's lots of good that can come out of it. So let's at least step aside, appreciate, enjoy. If it's not for you, that's fine. But there's going to be benefits that come, and we've talked about some of them, but there's a lot more coming around the corner. I mean, as a possible example, I see the opportunity perhaps to have limitless, very low cost, and non-polluting energy through solar power satellites. Don't know if that's going to happen, and if we're going to decide to go in that direction, but the potential is there. The physics says yes, it can be done. So it's a question of our priorities and what the constraints are in terms of carbon energy sources and all those kinds of things. As you mentioned, just the fact that you're limited in the size and the weight of the system you're flying on, it forces you to look for new ways to conserve and to reuse and to recycle. And going to the moon for long periods of time will stress that even further. Going to Mars, even more so. So I see a lot of potential benefits. One slight tangent, if you will, to this discussion, I see very soon, certainly in the next 10 years, a lot of the learning from the pure space activities being applied to what is referred to as point-to-point transportation through space. And so, again, Elon Musk, SpaceX, they're building Starship to colonize Mars, to be the human landing system on the moon. Great, looks like it has a lot of capability for that. That system apparently could also be used to take several hundred people at a time from one side of the Earth to the other in an hour. And think about how that could change things if it were not hugely expensive and it could be done safely and reliably. Again, bringing people together and allowing new ways to communicate, to travel, to do business. That can easily be a spin-off or an application of some of the technologies we're talking about here.
I often tell people with this mindset of, oh, we should be focusing just our energy into one particular area and not put energy in other places. I bring them back into the 1900s where Tesla, Edison, and the Wright brothers are all kind of in that era. And the society at that time has a lot of issues. Obviously, the medical aspect of it, the infrastructure of the society, has issues. And it would have been easy to tell Edison, Tesla, and the Wright brothers that it was absolutely pointless to try to power the world or to take the sky while there are diseases. I mean, why don't you be doctors and try to go and help the people rather than do these things that just seems to be so pointless? But the reality is that the world that they created created this new reality where a lot of these issues were taken care of, and that's exactly what's going to happen with space. It's not specifically wanting to just focus on one elevation, but it's to create a new field and where these other issues will be taken care of, and the technologies that are going to be brought to us are just going to help facilitate and give the tools. I mean, I remember when the Salesforce commercial came out, during the Super Bowl, and you got Matthew McConaughey, who's, now telling the world that we shouldn't be doing that. And in my head, I'm thinking, well, hold on a second. You're an actor. In terms of spending your life doing something worthful, I mean, being an actor is not necessarily the most impactful a career in life, so maybe you should revisit your choice. But life is so much more than a single issue strategy. We have artists, we have philosophers, we have writers, we need collectively to elevate the dialogue and the human experience so that we can discover the unexpected. Because if we focused just on a narrow strip of reality, I think we would miss a lot of the discoveries. And I think the space is just there's so many discoveries waiting for us, right?
I completely agree. I think that's one of the magical benefits of innovation and the kinds of things we're talking about here. But that brings up one other point I'd like to make, and that is that I think we've done a disservice to folks by helping them think that to be part of the space program, you have to be a whiz at math and science. No one else need apply. But if we're going to achieve some of these grand visions, the millions of people living and working in space to benefit Earth and so forth, you're going to need more than test pilots, engineers, doctors, scientists. You're going to need technicians, welders, hotel managers, tour guys, artists, painters, athletes, all those kinds of people. So I guess my advice to people, if you are interested in space, if you are passionate about space, regardless of your education or your current job or the other traditional criteria, go for it, because there's going to be a place for you in space. And I really think space is our future, and there's room for all of us.
It's absolutely. I was talking to Patty Stoll from ILC Dover, and we're talking about how much the company is, hiring new talents and a lot of engineers, obviously. But I said, what about the students who's right now in the Fashion Institute, has absolutely zero engineering skills, but wants to get into this industry? Is there a place for them? And she was like, absolutely. In fact, we need more. We need to focus on that human experience. Yesterday, talking to the GM at the Rosewood Hotel here in Washington, who's going to be the first hospitality business company to maybe not invest into space, but lead the conversation of what is going to be that human experience. Because right now, that experience is like going and roughing it in the outbacks, with freeze-dry food, and it's really not for everyone. But there's gonna be that need of like, okay, we got the engineering aspect covered, we got the sewers, we got the plumbings, and we got the electricity. But beyond that, now we need that richness of that human experience so that we can start moving more and more, and not just be this like, really high and dry experience that is not attractive for most of us. So we need these individuals that brings a different perspective. We need the artists, we need the writers. And I think part of the success of the Renaissance, if we go back into the history, was for the Medici and these powerful people to see the value in hiring artists to create a vision of the future that went beyond the knowledge of that time. And I think that the billionaires, that's their responsibility, is to get those people who usually have different skills and create that vision of the future, right?
I agree. And it's not just, well, it's my duty to have some of my wealth go to these other people, but there can be benefit. It can be different ways of looking at things, and it can be a win-win scenario, so real synergy opportunities.
Now, George, if people have questions for you, or if they're interested in following your journey and what you're working on, can they go? I mean, are you on LinkedIn, or do you have a website? Or how can they contact you?
Yes, LinkedIn is great, and also try to do a little on Twitter as well. So
excellent. So we'll make sure that the links are on the descriptions for your LinkedIn and for your Twitter. I think that you and I, we might see each other tomorrow. So I'm looking forward for that. We can continue that conversation. George, thank you so much for taking the time and for sharing your wisdom and your experience. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan.
Looking forward for the next time.
You bet.